Hello everybody, welcome back to Gran Turismo Story and Now, not Chat Plays. And today we're going to be doing a slightly different video. I know I say that a lot. We're going to be going in depth on one particular kind of car series rather than talking about the game as a whole. Now, firstly, two things to say. Thank you for the support on the previous video. That would have been the 7 cars you need to own in GT7 video. Did very well. I'm looking at it right here, 1.5k views, 41 likes, very good click-through rate as well, and I did get quite a lot of subs off that, so thank you to everyone who watched that. If you came from Discord, then hello. If you haven't subscribed here already, then make sure you do so. And secondly is I'm going to be starting a Patreon. Now I know that may sound a bit beggy or whatever, but the thing is the videos I'm kind of putting out now are equivalent to some YouTubers who do this as a full-time thing. Now this is far from a full-time job for me, and I feel the content I've been putting out has significantly upped in terms of effort, and it'd be nice if it was, reciprocated in terms of, financially. YouTube isn't letting me do that because I'm not monetized yet. So instead I decided to make a Patreon. Now this will be about £2 a month. And I can do whatever you kind of want me to do, really. I'm thinking maybe some like Discord server stuff, or if you're interested you can feature in some videos. There's quite a lot of videos I'd like to do. I just don't really have people to do the videos with, if that makes me sense. Obviously the Q&As and all the other stuff, but let me know. I'll kind of talk about this a bit more in the next episode because I'm still setting it up. But yeah, just to let you know that is happening, and if you're interested in that, then obviously be sure to let me know. So, today we're going to be talking about Gran Turismo's favourite car, the Nissan Skyline. Now, this video is inspired partly by a channel called Big Car, which I'll put on screen. Now, he does kind of car stories and goes very much in depth. That was part of my inspiration. And another channel called Waffle, which I have to be honest is one of my favourite Gran Turismo channel right now. I do aspire to be like his videos, if you will. And he kind of does this style of video, so I thought I'll combine them both, the Gran Turismo type and the car story, into one. So yeah, we're going to be talking about the Nissan Skyline in the Gran Turismo series. Let's go back in time to GT1. Now this is where the story of the Skyline in the Gran Turismo games did begin, but it is not where the Skyline story began. So the Skyline was actually around long before the GT games, obviously. Now let's have a quick look at the Skyline in real life context in the form of a history lesson. So the Skyline actually started in 1957 under the manufacturer Prince, not Nissan. The car was okay, but nothing special. We do actually have the 1962 Skyline Sport, if you will, in GT6, I believe GT4 and 5 as well. I've never used it, and it's quite expensive, and finding gameplay was quite hard since obviously nobody else uses it. Like I said, it was quite expensive, 300,000 I think, and I can see why. So let's move on. Then there was a second generation, which again wasn't very special, but they did have the idea of taking the Skyline into racing. We actually had two variants of this car in GT4, 5 and 6, the 1500 with a pathetic 66 horsepower, or the luxurious 2000 model with an inline 6 with a whopping 119 horsepower. At least these cars are cheap though. Then there was a third generation. Now this car was actually quite special. Most people do remember this car as kind of OG Skyline, and to be honest the car isn't too bad. It's slightly more expensive and it's not that powerful, but it's a fun car to drive, and it's a rival to the likes of the Alfa Romeos and BMWs at the time. Very similar kind of styling. Foreshadowing maybe? This car had 160 horsepower from an inline 6, and in GT7 anyway, I do see it used quite frequently. I did anyway. Online has good tunability as well. Then there were the not so relevant fourth generation. Now this car is virtually the same as the old car, slightly less power actually, and this stupid design of the rear end. In GT7 it costs about 4 times as much. No wonder nobody uses it. Then there was the fifth generation. Now this car isn't available in GT7, and I don't think it was used much in the early games either. It had an updated design, even had a turbo, boosting power to 187. Now by this point Nissan kind of had the Skyline formula worked out. An inline 6 with turbos. Now they needed to implement 4-wheel drive, but they'd have to wait a bit of a while for that. Then there were the 6th and 7th generation, also known as the R30 and the R31. Now these weren't very interesting, so I'll just summarise really. A new design, a range of engines, and now they're capable of getting over 200 horsepower. Still no 4-wheel drive though, I don't think. But at least they did give us the Super Simulator. Now let's talk about the R32, arguably the most memorable car in the series. Now this car has a range of engines, from turbo to twin turbo to naturally aspirated. Lots of power and predominantly touring car, as I'm sure you're all aware and heard before. Now I'll talk a bit more in depth about this car's performance in the game in a minute. But then there was the R33, which was very similar to the R32, albeit a new design, and the same with the R34, as much I hate to admit it. And this released just after the series started. Then finally there was the GTR R35, which included the first prototype all the way up until where we are now. Now I have left out the 11th and 12th generations as they were terrible and completely irrelevant, but I do talk about them a little bit later on. Now let's get into the actual video, so starting off with Gran Turismo 1. Now as I mentioned previously, the R34 and R35 didn't actually exist at this point. 1998 the R34 came out and later the R35, whereas the original Gran Turismo was 1997. And we know that GT1 did have a very limited car list of just 140 cars. However, Polyphony still found a way to fill it with as much Skyline as possible right from day one. Now they only had the R32 and R33 in this game, but they added the full lineup. Now let's take a look. So in the campaign, they had the 1989 version, the 1991 version, as well as the Nismo variant, the Type M and Type S, and the V-Spec and the GTS 4, likewise for the R33. There are 13 variants of just those two generations of Skyline alone, meaning that just under 10% of the available cars in GT1 are Skylines. That's insane. However, there is a phrase: you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Now, because the quantity of Skylines, we need to make sure the quality was still there. Now, it did this by ensuring the Skyline was one of the best handling cars in the game, of course, and it was also one of the fastest. Now, Kaz had to let people know they're the best by making them the final rewards. So to me, it implies kind of the best car in the game, you know, your whole journey throughout the game, saving the best till last, all that kind of thing. So let's talk about that a little bit. The reward for completing the hardest endurance race in the game is the Nismo race car, the tuned R33. And the reward for getting all golds on the hardest license in the game is the Nismo 400R, another tuned R33. Now to me it's clear what Kaz's favourite car is. Then there was Gran Turismo 2, and this was a special game in terms of the Skyline story for two major reasons. Now firstly, it was the first game to feature the all-new R34 Skyline. Now finally, Kaz had another Skyline to goon over, implement into the new game. Besides the design, didn't really offer much new things, slightly better performance though, likely due to the aerodynamics, because on paper. The second reason is it was the first game to feature the complete collection of Skylines. The older Skylines were added to give some representation for the classic cars, and they went to town on adding the new other Skyline variants. Now, it would take too long for me to list out every single new car that was implemented, but have a look at this little tier list thing I kind of made. Now, this summarises the models to make them easier to understand. By putting them in this tier list of kind of best to worst, you can kind of get an idea of, you know, how the Gran Turismo go about thinking about them. This applies to all games, and it's just a different way of thinking about it, really. So, starting from the bottom, if you will, is the original Skylines, but obviously they're not in the game. So we're going to go for the Skyline GTS Type S, and this kind of series is signified by the S in the name. This is just standard kind of Skyline GT, not GTR, just the basic GT. Has a 2.5 litre naturally aspirated inline-six, pushing around 180 brake horsepower. It's also front engine rear wheel drive. This explains why you sometimes see this Skyline in the front engine rear wheel drive challenges, despite thinking Skyline's four wheel drive. It gets a 60 in a sluggish 8.1 seconds and has a top speed so depressing even Gran Turismo Wiki doesn't mention it. Now going up a little bit, we have the GTS M, signified by the M. I do have to be honest, in the R34 generation, this is completely all thrown off, and the M is now suddenly the luxury model. I don't really know if I'm being honest, but for the R32 and R33, I'm getting a bit confused now. This is how it kind of applies. So this car has a smaller engine at only 2 litres compared to the lower S 2.5. However, it does come with a turbo, but it's still rear-wheel drive. Now we have the GTS 4, which, you guessed it, yes, is 4-wheel drive, signified by the 4, obviously. Now, it has the same engine as the Type M, but with 4-wheel drive, it's kind of like the M, just with 4-wheel drive. Wireless power at 220 brake horsepower may be disappointing. It's not too bad for its time. Then we get to the middle of the list, how I describe it anyway. This is your basic kind of GTR. Quite hard to find in the games at all these different variants. Now this has the well-known RB26DETT or RB26 engine, 2.6 litre inline 6 twin turbo, producing 279 horsepower officially, over 300 unofficially, and complete with 4-wheel drive obviously. This is the car we all know and love. Then there was a slight upgrade to this in the terms of the V-Spec and the V-Spec 2. Now, there wasn't massive amount of change, but there were some additions to help the car in racing, so some brake upgrades and some suspension upgrades. And nearing the top, we get to the Skyline N1. This car's even better than the V-Spec, although on paper they both look and seem much the same. It actually doesn't feature in GT2, but I thought I'd include it anyway. Then finally we get to the top of the list, and this is the aftermarket tuner cars. Now these have completely new engines and just new everything really. They range from just a few aero upgrades to completely rebuilding the car and getting it to sometimes 3 times its original power. So yeah, I hope this was a kind of good way of, describing the different Skylines. I know it can get confusing, and what doesn't help is when they overlap, so the GTS M4, and it gets very difficult, but genuinely this is a better way of thinking about it, so I hope that makes sense. Now let's talk about the Skyline in GT3. Now this is a game I'm very familiar with. In the Beginners League in Gran Turismo 3, the prize cars you get are dreadful, as you can see here, new Beetles, tiny 63 horsepower K cars, and you're lucky if you get any prize cars with anything above 250 horsepower, so the thought of buying a Skyline just kind of go round everything does seem very attractive. I have to admit, in all the GT games, this one in particular is the one which I think has the least amount of love for the Skyline. Only about 5 different variants in the game. I know it's still quite a lot. Money earning is a lot harder in this stage of the game, so buying a Skyline is actually quite difficult unless you're lucky enough to get one from the GT World Championship at the very end of the Beginners League. But the chances are you don't have one yet, let's be honest. Well, it's about time you did get yourself one, as the campaign will be pretty difficult without one. Firstly, you'll have the Japanese Championship to deal with, and if you don't want to use one of the 1 million Lancer Evos you have been given, then the Skyline is probably your next best option. You'll then need it for the 4-wheel drive championship, and then the turbo race, and then the race of the red emblem, a Skyline only race. However, we can't forget the elephant in the room now. I'm sure most GT fans and Reddit users already know this, but it's something funny that I like to go talk about. Now, there is this championship in Gran Turismo 3, and I think in GT4 and GT5 also, I could be wrong, reserved for cars from the 80s, except there are a few non-80s cars allowed. Now, I know what you're thinking, why haven't a championship for only cars from the 1980s and then let cars from other years in? I don't know, I'm not polyphony, I think it's stupid, but there we go. Of course, one of the cars that was allowed into these 80s, despite not being from that, was the Nissan Skyline. Not any Skyline though, this had to be the R32 GTR V-Spec. Yes, the slightly upgraded 4-wheel drive OP Skyline. Of course. So if you do decide to enter this race with MX-5s and potentially a tuned older RX-7, this happens. Seriously, polyphony, what is this? So we have the standard 3 R32s, that being the Type S, Type M and the standard GTR, or the V-Spec. And this comes complete with the Calsonic R32 race car. Now I think you have to unlock this, and it's quite difficult to get as you can't get it in arcade mode even with the bonus items, unpurchasable as well. We also had the R33 in this game and the R34 with all 4 variants. But we did also have the Pennzoil Nismo, quite a nice car, the new Calsonic or the knockoff Calsonic, the Loctite I think it's called, and the Nismo. And Nismo complete with their R33 road car, the 400R, and the GTR tuned for both the R32 and R33. But of course you can't forget about the tuner Mines, who also provided their R34 with a healthy 600 horsepower. For this we kind of get the message that the developers like the Skyline very much. This was only the beginning. Now in 2005 we saw the release of GT4, arguably the best game in the series, and with it came a lot more races, a lot more cars, and most importantly a lot more Skylines. I always felt as though GT4 was about using some cars that you probably not thought about using in other games. There was a lot of emphasis on classic cars as well as the higher end stuff, while normal cars kind of were included, like the basic Skylines, NSXs, Dodge Vipers. It was clear to me anyway that they weren't the main focus. So let's start with the classic Skylines that were introduced. They added at least one version of every single Skyline generation, or that had been up until that point anyway, from 1962 all the way up to the 2000s. However, the race cars is where it did get silly. We had some of the same race cars from previous titles, but this time with some extra additions. Firstly, they added the R34 pace car. I know this car is quite iconic. I still don't know why these were even included, but another Skyline to the list, I guess it makes them happy.
Really?
Another funny thing is the addition of yet another Pennzoil Skyline. This time as a black bumper and the Nissan logo is red and not black. What's funny is that the new car actually has 50 less horsepower and is actually a lot worse than the older car. It's still from the R34, so I don't even know why it exists. We also got 2 new Zenarvi Skylines. Also got this Falcon Skyline, which has an interesting... Also got this Falcon Skyline, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it looks really cool. Secondly, is that Nissan were already using the R35 platform for their concepts, while the tuners were still stuck on the R34 platform 3 years later. So, talking about the R35, or simply the GTR as it was known then, we actually got our first look at it in this game, and I must admit if I saw this in 2001 I would be impressed. It's miles ahead of the R34 that released just 2 years earlier. It has over 455 horsepower, over 100 more compared to the R34, and it reached just shy of 200 miles an hour, not bad for a 25 or 4-seater. Now this car was a concept, so I'm not sure if it can be used in the game. I'm trying to get my GT4 emulator up and running, so for now I just have to put up with this gameplay. But you can see from the gameplay, even against the latest hype cars at the time, you can see just how fast this thing was. I've seen some comments as well talking about it has really good gear changes. I can't verify that. And one other thing I found interesting is that there was actually a race variant of this concept, so they hadn't finalised the project, and Nissan were already using it for racing. And it's, it's quite an iconic car actually. I can see this paint job being used a lot in the older games. I see recreation of this paint job being used as even up to GT7. So it was quite an iconic car. Yeah, GT4 was what I felt gave the Skyline, it was the golden point for the Skyline. This is where everyone at some point had a variant of the Skyline, most of the time multiple. And I must admit, I think the game did a lot for the Skyline, and I think the Skyline did a lot for the game. It was very much a partnership there. So I'm going to talk about GT5 and GT6 together, as I feel that they didn't really contribute much differently to the Skyline story in the GT games. Nevertheless though, there are still some things to talk about. Firstly, the quantity of the Skylines peaked in these 2 games, each having over 100, each game having over 1,000 cars, so it's only natural there's going to be a lot of Skylines added, of course. but this list is just insane, so let me read out to you just how many Skylines there were. Obviously we had the first generation, 2 cars from the second generation, the third generation, a car from the fourth generation, a car from the fifth, the sixth and seventh generation, the whole lot really. But anyway, let's get into the real Skyline. So starting off with the R32, we had the original from both 1989 and 1991, then the N1 variant, remember that's kind of the highest Nissan will go to tune it, from 1991, and the V-Spec from 1993 and the V-Spec from 1994. Then, like I said, when they cross over, the N1 V-Spec is a combination of both. Obviously the slower Type S, the Type M from both 1989 and 1991, and the Calisonic Skyline and the Touring car. Then the R33, and we had this from both 1995, 1996 and 1997, as well as a V-Spec version from 1995, 1996 and 1997. We had the N1 version from 1995, as well as the V-Spec LM Limited from 1996. I don't know what this was, I think it was a limited edition to honour the touring car achievement or something. As well as a touring car and obviously the Calisonic. Then the R34, and this is where it gets insane. And we had the 1999 and the 2000 version, the M-Spec from 2001, the NER-Spec from 2002, also the MNP edition from 1999, wherever that is. The Midnight Purple edition, and the V-Spec from both 1999 and 2000. The Spec 2 N1 from 2000 with the Spec 2 NER from 2002. The N-Spec 1 from 1999. As for race cars, they had the Zenavi, the Nismo, the Zenavi Nismo. Then for race cars, the Zenavi Nismo, the Zenami Hiratov, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Of course, the touring car and the new Calisonic. We had the 2001 Pennzoil and the 1999 Pennzoil, which I mentioned earlier. The Loctite, the 2 pace cars, the Falcon with the cool paint job. And although the 11th and 12th generation wasn't as popular amongst fans, Polyphony Digital still managed to sneak them in. We have the 11th generation in coupe and sedan, which is a saloon for the European lot. And also we had the sedan with a 3 litre or a 3.5 litre, although there was only a 2 horsepower difference. Now this is a very interesting situation. There's a couple other things that's odd about these 2 cars. I can spend a whole video talking about it. And then there was the coupe and the sedan for the 12th generation. Finally we come to the R35. Now we have the R35 concept from 2001 and the race car with it. Then we have yet another GTR prototype from 2005, I'm not really sure why this exists. Then in 2007 we got our first look at the actual release of the GTR, along with the black mask, wherever that is. Then in 2012 we got the black edition. Now this is where the car started to become quite good, as well as the Nismo version that came in 2014. Then got the GTR 500 version and the normal. Then had the GTR 500 version of the R35, and obviously normal and stealth edition. Stealth is like just black, you didn't really know. The Nismo Academy version of this car, and some other weird name version of the Nismo GT3. We had a GT3 base model, the normal GT3, and another GT3 version with another weird name. Of course the R35 had a touring car variant, why not? And it also had a V-Spec version 2009, so I should have mentioned that earlier to go along with it. Had a Motul Art Trek race car, the Zenavi Nismo, and a Woodrow race car, and the Car Lasso, and the Yellow Hat. That's all. So, do you think they overdid it with the amount of variants in this game? Bearing in mind this is only one car model that Nissan makes. It's just insane. Like, there's probably more Skylines in this game than there is in GT1. I do like the Skyline, I do have to admit, but when all the race cars have the same horsepower and they're just one different paint job colours, I think what's the point really? Now the Skylines did drive well, they still kind of lived up to their concept the name of the R32 did. And terrorising the track, going past everyone. great tunability, but they didn't feel that much different. There was a clear difference between the front engine wheel drive and the four-wheel drive ones, obviously, and obviously with the turbo, the naturally aspirated ones. But I felt, you could drive an R32 normal and then drive an R34 V-Spec and you could hardly tell a difference. And that brings me on to GT7. We're not going to talk about GT Sport because that game is terrible. That brings us to Gran Turismo 7, which is a very different game in terms of how it approaches the cars. So I mentioned in my previous videos, quite a few of them actually, that GT7 very much focuses on quality instead of quantity. So the amount of skylines in the game has significantly been reduced. Now we don't have all of these, 20 million versions. We have one R33, one R32, one R34, if you will, or thereabouts. So, that kind of makes it easier. So instead of having 3 or 4 cars where, they're not very accurate, they don't drive the best, the prices aren't the best, they can have one, but make that one skyline that's in the game really good, rather than having 4 that are kind of okay. Now, I've said, my thoughts about this, whether it's good or bad. I can see some saying it's good, some saying it's bad. But it's just an interesting kind of take on it, if you will. They have still kept in some of the older generations, notably the 3rd generation, I remember, is in the game. I see that used a lot. The 4th generation is in, but I don't really see it used often at all, really. Obviously the 1st and 2nd generation isn't in, neither the 11th and 12th. Neither are the other generations in between. We have got the R35 in the form of the normal one, the Nismo, and a couple of other variants, but yeah, the skyline count has been significantly limited. I think this is probably the smallest it's ever been, if I'm being honest. But yeah, so also the prices, they kind of reflect better the car's real life value. So the skyline is now R34 and it was on 400k nearly. Now I know this, obviously not good if you want to buy a lot of them, but obviously supply and demand, that's basic economics. If loads of people want it, the price is going to go up, and it just makes it a lot more historically accurate. Actually, I just wanted to kind of talk to you at the end a little bit. This is my first type of this sort of video really. I'm trying to establish a new direction in the channel, to do more generalised videos in Gran Turismo 7 rather than kind of series. I've found what works, what doesn't, and I am trying to get better. So I'm thinking of doing these sort of videos again if they do well. Kind of doing a unique style in each one, because I found the Gran Turismo Legends series one, it was good, it was a bit too generic gameplay, that was it. So I'm trying to use my emulators and all stuff to get the videos to a really good level of production while still, being original. I'm thinking of doing a Sylvia next, but I'll leave it up to you if you have any suggestions in the comments. Finally, about this Patreon, I'm going to do £2 a month. I spoke about it earlier, but I'm going to be setting that up. You could do I don't really know what to do, if I'm being honest, but I'd kind of leave it up to you guys. I know a couple of other people that have had Patrons and it kind of works well, Discord server type thing. And we get some other servers involved. I have some video ideas. There's a lot of video ideas I'd like to do, I just need people to do it, and I think that's where this Patreon will hopefully come in. But yeah, thank you for watching.